I still remember the exact moment I realized kindness was getting me absolutely nowhere with this woman. It was a Tuesday afternoon in late September, around 2:30 p.m., and I'd just returned from my weekly physical therapy session at the VA hospital. My right leg was throbbing, that deep, bone-ache kind of pain that no amount of ibuprofen ever really touches. The kind of pain that's been my constant companion since an IED turned my Humvee into a metal coffin outside Kandahar 7 years ago. I was 31 years old, and some days I felt like I was 70. I pulled my beat-up 2015 Honda Civic into the parking lot of Riverside Gardens Apartments, already anticipating the relief of getting inside, elevating my leg, and maybe, just maybe, getting through an episode of whatever show I was binge-watching without wanting to scream. But as I rounded the corner toward my designated spot, the one clearly marked with the blue wheelchair symbol and the sign that read reserved, APT-3B, tow-away zone, my heart sank. There it was again. That goddamn silver Mercedes-Benz GLE, gleaming in the afternoon sun like some kind of middle finger made of German engineering and entitlement. This was the 8th time. The 8th time in 3 weeks. I sat there in my car for a moment, hands gripping the steering wheel, trying to do the breathing exercises my therapist had taught me. 4 counts in, hold for 4, 4 counts out. But the breathing exercises were designed for managing PTSD triggers, not for managing the rage that comes from watching someone with working legs steal the one accommodation that makes your daily life remotely manageable. I parked in a regular spot 4 rows back, the closest available space, and began the long, painful walk to the building entrance. Each step sent jolts of electricity up my damaged leg. By the time I reached the door, I was sweating despite the cool autumn air, and I had to stop to catch my breath. That's when I saw her. She emerged from the building lobby carrying 2 large shopping bags from Nordstrom, her designer sunglasses perched perfectly on her head, her yoga pants probably costing more than my monthly grocery budget. She was maybe 35, with that particular brand of artificial blonde that screams expensive salon rather than box dye. Her name, I'd learned from previous encounters, was Melissa Hartwell, and she lived in 7F, one of the penthouse units. "Excuse me," I called out, trying to keep my voice level. You're parked in my spot again." She glanced over at me, and I saw the brief flicker of recognition in her eyes. She'd seen me before. We'd had this conversation before. "Oh, I'm so sorry," she said, her tone suggesting she was anything but. "I was just running in quickly to grab a few things. I'll move it right now." "That's what you said last Tuesday," I replied, limping toward her. "And the Thursday before that. And the Monday before that." She sighed, the kind of exasperated sigh you might give a particularly persistent telemarketer. "Look," I said, "I'm sorry. I don't see what the big deal is. There are plenty of other spots." "The big deal," I said, feeling my jaw clench, "is that this is my assigned accessible parking spot. I'm disabled. I need that spot." Her eyes flicked down to my leg. I was limping noticeably by this point, and then back up to my face. "You don't look disabled," she said. Those 4 words. Those 4 words that every person with an invisible or non-obvious disability has heard 1,000 times. Those 4 words that make you want to scream, to pull up your pant leg and show the scars, to list every surgery, every procedure, every night you've woken up in cold sweats reliving the moment your entire life changed. But I didn't do any of that. Instead, I said, very quietly, "I'm a disabled veteran. I was injured in Afghanistan. That spot is legally assigned to me, and parking there without authorization is a violation of both federal disability access laws and your lease agreement." She rolled her eyes. Actually rolled them. Like I was inconveniencing her with my war injuries and my legal rights. "Jesus, okay," she said, clicking her key fob. The Mercedes chirped. "You don't have to be so dramatic about it. I'll move it." She threw her shopping bags into the back seat and drove off, leaving me standing there, shaking with a combination of pain, exhaustion, and impotent fury. That night, I did something I probably should have done weeks earlier. I opened a new document on my laptop and created a log. Date, time, duration, and a brief description. I titled it Parking Violations, Melissa Hartwell, Unit 7F. Then I went back through my phone's photo archive and found every picture I'd taken of that silver Mercedes in my spot. There were 7 of them, each with a timestamp. I told myself I was just documenting things in case it continued. I told myself I probably wouldn't need it. I told myself that maybe she'd finally gotten the message. I was wrong on all counts. The violations didn't stop. If anything, they got worse. October rolled around, and Melissa Hartwell's silver Mercedes became as much a fixture in my parking spot as the faded paint of the wheelchair symbol beneath it. Sometimes she'd be there for 15 minutes. Sometimes for an hour. Once, she was there for nearly 3 hours while I had to park in the overflow lot on the far side of the complex, a full 200-yard walk that left me nearly in tears by the time I reached my apartment. Every single time, I documented it. Photo of the car in my spot. Screenshot of the timestamp. Measurement of how long it was there, based on when I arrived and when I saw it leave from my third-floor window. Notes about weather conditions, because on rainy days, the extra distance wasn't just painful, it was dangerous when my leg got wet and unpredictable. I tried the official channels. Oh, how I tried. In early October, I filed my first complaint with the building management office. I met with the property manager, a tired-looking woman named Sandra Chen, who listened sympathetically and promised she'd send a warning letter to Ms. Hartwell. The violations continued. 2 weeks later, I filed a second complaint, this time bringing printed photos. Sandra sighed and said she'd issue a formal notice and that these things take time to resolve. The violations continued. I tried talking to Melissa directly again. This was in late October, around the 25th violation. I caught her as she was getting out of her Mercedes again in my spot, and I was coming back from a doctor's appointment. Ms. Hartwell, I said, keeping my voice calm, professional. We really need to talk about this parking situation. Oh my God, she said, not even looking at me as she checked her phone. Are you seriously still on about this? I'm here for like 5 minutes. You've parked in my spot 25 times in the last 6 weeks, I said. She finally looked up from her phone, her expression somewhere between annoyed and incredulous. Have you literally been counting? That's honestly kind of creepy. It's not creepy to document someone repeatedly breaking the law, I replied. Breaking the law? She laughed, actually laughed. It's a parking spot. You act like I'm committing murder. Maybe if you spent less time obsessing over parking and more time getting a life, you wouldn't be so uptight about this. She walked past me into the building, leaving a cloud of expensive perfume and casual cruelty in her wake. That night, I added violation number 25 to my spreadsheet. I'd expanded it by now, adding columns for duration, weather conditions, impact on my mobility, and attempts at resolution. It was becoming less of a simple log and more of a comprehensive case file. My friend Derek, another vet I'd met at the VA support group, came over for our weekly gaming session that Friday. He noticed the spreadsheet open on my laptop. Dude, what is this? He asked, squinting at the screen. Are you building a legal case or something? Maybe, I said. Against the Mercedes lady? He'd heard me complain about the situation before. Man, just let it go. Some people are just assholes. You're letting her live rent-free in your head. But that was the thing, she wasn't living rent-free anywhere. She was paying probably $3,000 a month for her penthouse apartment, while I was scraping by on disability payments and a part-time remote job doing data entry. She had every advantage in the world, and she was using those advantages to make my life, someone who'd already sacrificed so much, that much harder. I can't let it go, I told Derek. Every time she parks there, it's not just an inconvenience. It's pain. Real, physical pain. It's sometimes having to choose between going inside and getting my medication or sitting in my car for 30 minutes waiting for her to finish her quick errand. It's about the principle that some people think rules just don't apply to them. Derek looked at me for a long moment, then nodded slowly. All right, man. If you're gonna do this, do it right. Document everything. Make it airtight. November was when things reached their breaking point. The violations were coming almost daily now. Some days, Melissa would park in my spot twice, once in the afternoon, once in the evening. It was like she'd decided that my spot was actually her spot, and my protests were just background noise to be ignored. Violation 38 happened on November 12th, and it was the one that nearly broke me. I'd had a particularly brutal day. My leg pain had been flaring up all week, and I'd barely slept the night before. I had a virtual appointment with my psychiatrist at 3 p.m. to discuss adjusting my PTSD medication, and I was running late because the previous appointment had run over. I pulled into the parking lot at 2:57 p.m., frantic because I didn't want to miss another appointment I'd already rescheduled twice. And there, of course, was the silver Mercedes. I sat in my car and called the building management office. It went to voicemail. I called the towing company that had a contract with our complex. They said they couldn't tow without building management authorization. I tried calling Sandra Chen's direct line. No answer. By the time I found another spot and limped back to my apartment, I'd missed my appointment entirely. I had to reschedule for 2 weeks out, which meant 2 more weeks before we could adjust medication that clearly wasn't working. I sat on my couch, leg elevated, ice pack numbing the pain, and I made a decision. This wasn't going to stop through normal channels. Melissa Hartwell had calculated, correctly, that the inconvenience to her of parking in the correct spot was greater than the consequences of parking in mine. The warning letters from management were meaningless. My personal appeals fell on deaf ears. The system that was supposed to protect my rights as a disabled person was failing me completely. But I had something Melissa didn't have: time, determination, and a military background that had taught me the value of meticulous intelligence gathering and strategic planning. I expanded my documentation system. I didn't just take photos anymore, I took videos, showing the entire context. I recorded audio of our interactions using my phone, legal in our state with one-party consent. I filed freedom of information requests with the city to get copies of the parking regulations and disability access laws. I requested my lease agreement and building rules from management, highlighting every relevant section about assigned parking and accessibility accommodations. I researched the fines and penalties for parking in accessible spots without authorization. In our state, it ranged from $250 to $500 per violation, with higher penalties for repeat offenders. Multiply that by 50 violations, and we were talking about potentially $12,500 to $25,000 in fines. I also discovered that parking in designated accessible parking without proper authorization wasn't just a civil infraction, it could be a misdemeanor criminal offense, especially with a pattern of repeated violations. The violations kept coming. 40, 45, 47. Each one documented with the precision of a military operation. December arrived with cold rain and violation number 50. 50 times. 50 times over 4 months that this woman had decided her convenience mattered more than my mobility, my dignity, my rights. It was December 18th, exactly 4 months since the first violation I'd documented. Melissa's Mercedes was in my spot again, and this time, I didn't feel angry. I felt calm. Resolved. I took my photos and videos as usual. Then I went inside, sat down at my laptop, and began compiling everything into a comprehensive report. It took me 6 hours. I created a detailed timeline with every violation, complete with photographic evidence, timestamps, weather conditions, and impact statements describing how each violation affected me. I included copies of all my complaints to building management and their inadequate responses. I attached relevant sections of federal disability law, state parking regulations, and our building's lease agreement. I wrote a cover letter explaining my situation, a disabled combat veteran, honorably discharged, with documented mobility impairments requiring accessible parking. I described the pattern of harassment and discrimination I'd experienced. I explained how building management had failed to adequately address the situation despite multiple complaints. Then I made 3 copies of everything. 1 copy went to Sandra Chen at building management, along with a formal letter stating that if the situation was not immediately resolved, I would be forced to pursue legal action and file complaints with both the city and federal authorities. 1 copy went to the local police department, filed as a formal complaint about repeated illegal parking in a designated accessible space, with a request for investigation and prosecution. And 1 copy I kept for myself, backed up in 3 different locations. I hand-delivered the package to building management on December 19th. Sandra's face went pale as she flipped through the documentation. "Mr. Brennan," she said quietly, "I had no idea it was this extensive. You would have known if you'd actually investigated when I first complained 3 months ago, I replied. Not angry, just factual. I'll escalate this to the property owner immediately, she said. Thank you, I said. I've also filed a police report. They'll likely be contacting you for your records as well. Things moved quickly after that. On December 21st, Melissa received a formal notice from building management that she was in violation of her lease agreement and had 48 hours to respond. The notice included photos of every single violation and informed her that she was facing lease termination and financial penalties. On December 23rd, 2 police officers came to the building to investigate my complaint. They interviewed me, reviewed my documentation, and then went to speak with Melissa. I heard about what happened next from Derek, who heard it from another tenant who'd been in the hallway. Apparently, when the officers explained the potential fines, $250 per violation, times 50 violations, equaling $12,500 in penalties, Melissa had gone from indignant to hysterical. She'd insisted that she didn't know it was that serious, that she'd thought it was just building rules, not actual laws. The officers had explained that ignorance of the law wasn't a defense, and that parking in designated accessible spaces without authorization was a prosecutable offense. On December 27th, I received a formal letter from building management. After reviewing the extensive documentation and consulting with their legal team, they had decided to terminate Melissa Hartwell's lease effective January 31st. She would not be eligible to renew and must vacate the premises. Additionally, she would be responsible for paying all applicable fines levied by the city. On January 3rd, I received a certified letter from Melissa's attorney offering to settle any potential civil claims I might have for $5,000 if I agreed not to pursue further legal action. I declined. I wasn't interested in money, I was interested in accountability. The city prosecutor's office took the case seriously. By mid-January, Melissa had been formally charged with 50 counts of illegal parking in an accessible space. She eventually pleaded guilty to a reduced charge covering all 50 violations in exchange for a fine of $8,500 and 40 hours of community service at a veterans rehabilitation center. It's March now, and Melissa moved out 6 weeks ago. I saw her on moving day, directing the movers from the lobby. She didn't look at me, and I didn't say anything to her. There was nothing left to say. My parking spot has been empty and available every single day since January 31st. That might not sound like much to most people, but for me, it's everything. It's independence. It's dignity. It's the acknowledgement that my needs matter, that the sacrifices I made serving my country mean something, that disability rights aren't just suggestions for when they're convenient. I still have chronic pain. I still have PTSD. I still have nightmares about Kandahar and days when getting out of bed feels impossible. But I also have a parking spot that's actually mine, and I have the knowledge that I stood up for myself when every system designed to protect me had failed. Derek asked me last week if I thought it was all worth it, the 4 months of documentation, the stress, the confrontation. I thought about it for a moment, then told him about something my platoon sergeant used to say: the only thing necessary for the triumph of evil is for good men to do nothing. Melissa wasn't evil, not really. She was just thoughtless, entitled, and convinced that the rules didn't apply to her. But thoughtless cruelty, repeated 50 times, becomes its own kind of malice. And systems that fail to protect the vulnerable, even when repeatedly notified, become their own kind of injustice. So yes, it was worth it. Every photo, every timestamp, every carefully documented detail. Because sometimes the only way to fight back against injustice isn't with rage or violence, but with patience, precision, and an absolute refusal to accept that your suffering doesn't matter. My parking spot has a fresh coat of blue paint now. Building management repainted it as part of what Sandra called recommitting to accessibility compliance. The wheelchair symbol is crisp and clear, impossible to miss. And every time I pull into that spot, every time I park there knowing it'll be available, every time I make that shorter walk to my building entrance, I'm reminded that sometimes, just sometimes, doing the hard work of standing up for yourself pays off. I still keep the documentation file. All 127 pages of it, backed up in the cloud and on 2 external hard drives. I probably don't need it anymore, but I keep it anyway. It's a reminder that I'm not powerless, that my voice matters, and that perseverance, even when it feels futile, can eventually lead to justice. After all, I learned a lot in the military, but one of the most important lessons was this: never quit, never surrender, and never let anyone tell you that you don't deserve the respect and dignity you've earned. One parking spot at a time. The morning I decided to stop being polite and start collecting evidence, I took a photograph of a silver Mercedes-Benz parked in my designated handicapped spot at 6:47 a.m. The driver's side door was still warm when I touched it. She'd literally just gone inside. That was violation number 12, and I was done playing nice. My name is Brennan. I'm 31 years old, and I've been documenting every single instance of parking theft like I'm building a case for the International Criminal Court. Because after 4 months of asking nicely, after a dozen conversations that went nowhere, after countless complaints to building management that vanished into some administrative black hole, I realized something important. People like Melissa Hartwell don't respond to politeness. They respond to consequences. And I was about to give her more consequences than she'd ever imagined. Let me back up for a second and explain how I got here, standing in a parking lot at dawn with my phone out, photographing a luxury vehicle like I'm some kind of private investigator. I'm a disabled veteran. Afghanistan, 2018, an IED that turned my right leg into a reconstruction project involving 14 surgeries, countless pins, and a lifetime prescription for pain management. I've got a handicapped placard, an assigned accessible parking spot at Riverside Gardens Apartments, clearly marked as reserved, APT 3B, and a body that reminds me every single day why I need that spot. Melissa Hartwell, 36 years old, resident of the Penthouse Unit 7F, drives a silver Mercedes-Benz GLE that costs more than I'll make in 2 years. And for reasons I'll never fully understand, she decided sometime back in late August that my parking spot was actually her personal convenience zone. The first few times, I was understanding. People make mistakes. Maybe she didn't see the sign. Maybe she was having an emergency. I'd leave polite notes on her windshield. "Hi, this is an assigned handicapped spot. Please park elsewhere. Thank you." Then I tried talking to her directly. She'd smile, apologize insincerely, say she was just running in for a second, and promise to move immediately. She never moved immediately. Sometimes she wouldn't move for an hour. By September, I'd filed 3 separate complaints with building management. Sandra Chen, the property manager, a woman in her late 40s who always looked like she was one complaint away from a nervous breakdown, would nod sympathetically and promise to send a letter or issue a warning. Nothing changed. By October, Melissa wasn't even pretending to be apologetic anymore. When I'd catch her coming out of the building, she'd roll her eyes, sigh dramatically, and mutter something about how I was making a big deal out of nothing. Nothing. That's what my mobility issues were to her. Nothing. The fact that parking 4 rows back instead of in my assigned spot meant an extra 200 yards of walking on a leg held together with titanium and hope, that was nothing to her. The fact that on rainy days, that extra distance meant I'd arrive at my apartment door sweating, shaking, and sometimes crying from pain, that was nothing. So in early November, I stopped trying to appeal to her humanity and started building a case that would make a federal prosecutor weep with joy. The documentation system I created would have made my old intelligence officer proud. I set up a spreadsheet with multiple tabs. The main tab tracked each violation with the date, time of arrival, time of departure, and duration. I had a second tab calculating the total number of violations, average duration, and patterns. Turned out Melissa particularly liked to steal my spot on Tuesdays and Thursdays between 2 p.m. and 5 p.m., probably because those were her shopping days. A third tab contained links to every photograph and video I'd taken. I didn't just snap a quick picture anymore. I'd take multiple angles, wide shot showing the entire parking spot with the handicapped symbol visible, close-up of her license plate, shot of the reserved sign, and a selfie-style video of me explaining the date, time, and impact of each violation. November 14th, 2:37 p.m., I'd say into my phone camera, standing beside her Mercedes. "This is violation number 33. I've just returned from a physical therapy appointment. My leg is particularly painful today due to weather changes. There's a cold front moving in. Because Ms. Hartwell is parked in my assigned accessible spot, I'm now forced to park in the overflow lot, approximately 215 yards from my building entrance. This will cause significant pain and mobility difficulty. I felt ridiculous doing it at first, talking to my phone like some kind of YouTuber. But Derek, my buddy from the VA support group, had given me solid advice. Make it personal, make it specific, make it undeniable. I also started photographing the weather conditions. Rain made everything worse. My leg gets unpredictable when wet, and I've fallen twice in parking lots during bad weather. So every rainy day that Melissa parked in my spot got special documentation, photos of the puddles I had to navigate, the distance I had to walk, sometimes even video of me limping across the parking lot, trying not to slip. I know how it sounds. Obsessive. Maybe even a little unhinged. But here's what people who've never had to fight for basic accessibility don't understand. When the systems designed to protect you fail, when the authorities who are supposed to enforce the rules shrug and tell you these things take time, you're left with exactly two choices. You can accept being victimized, or you can become your own advocate with a level of thoroughness that makes people uncomfortable. I chose the latter. By December, I had documented 43 violations. 43 times in just over 3 months that this woman had decided her convenience trumped my legal rights. But it was violation number 47 that changed everything. It was December 10th, around 3:15 in the afternoon. I'd had a particularly brutal day, a consultation with my orthopedic surgeon about potentially needing another surgery, followed by a psych appointment for my PTSD medication adjustment. I was emotionally drained, physically exhausted, and I'd been holding it together by sheer force of will. I turned into the parking lot, and there it was. That goddamn silver Mercedes, gleaming in the weak winter sunlight, parked dead center in my spot like it had every right to be there. Something in me just broke. I parked in a regular spot 6 rows back, the closest available, and I sat there for a moment, hands gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles went white. I could feel my heart pounding, that familiar tightness in my chest that my therapist would recognize as an anxiety attack brewing. Then I saw her. Melissa emerged from the building, but she wasn't alone. She was with another woman, both of them laughing, both carrying multiple shopping bags from high-end stores. They were having a great day. A wonderful afternoon of shopping and friendship, unmarred by any consideration for the people their actions might affect. I got out of my car and started the long walk toward the building. My leg was screaming at me by the 3rd row of cars. By the 5th row, I was limping noticeably, my breath coming in short gasps. Melissa saw me approaching. I watched her face shift from laughing to annoyed in about half a second. "Oh God, not this again," I heard her say to her friend, loud enough that she clearly wanted me to hear it. "Ms. Hartwell," I called out, my voice strained from pain and effort. "That's my spot." Again. She didn't even look at me properly, just waved dismissively in my direction. Yeah, I know. I'll move it in a minute. We're just loading up the car." "You've been here for over an hour," I said, checking my phone's timestamp from when I'd first seen her car. "Jesus Christ, do you literally have nothing better to do than track my parking?" She finally turned to face me, her expression somewhere between irritated and amused. "This is honestly getting creepy. Maybe you should talk to someone about this obsession." Her friend laughed. Actually laughed, like my pain and frustration were entertainment. "I have talked to someone," I said quietly. "I've talked to building management 12 times. I've talked to you directly at least 15 times. I've left notes, filed complaints, followed every proper channel. And you keep parking in my spot." "It's a parking spot," Melissa said, her voice dripping with condescension. "Not a throne. You don't own it. The building has like 100 spots. Pick a different one." "It's an assigned accessible parking spot," I replied, my voice shaking now from pain, from anger, from sheer exhaustion. "I'm disabled. I need that spot. It's not a preference, it's a medical necessity." She looked at me for a long moment, and I saw something flicker in her eyes. Not sympathy, not understanding. Calculation. She was deciding whether I was worth even pretending to care about. "Look," she said finally, "I'm sorry about your leg or whatever, but I've lived here for 3 years. I park wherever there's a spot open. If you have a problem with that, take it up with management." "I have taken it up with management," I said. 12 times. Then I guess they don't think it's that big of a deal either, she said, smiling now. Actually smiling. Maybe take the hint. She and her friend got into the Mercedes and drove away, leaving me standing there in the cold December air, my leg throbbing, my pride in tatters. That night, I sat down at my laptop and I made a decision. I was done with channels. I was done with process. I was done with hoping that people would suddenly develop empathy or that systems would suddenly start working. It was time to build a case so airtight, so comprehensive, so undeniably damning that no one, not Melissa, not building management, not the police, not anyone, could ignore it or dismiss it. I spent the next week compiling everything into a formal legal document. I'm not a lawyer, but I'd learned a lot during my time in the military about documentation, evidence, and building cases. I organized everything chronologically, creating a narrative that would be impossible to refute. The document opened with a cover page, formal complaint, pattern of disability discrimination and illegal parking violations by Melissa Hartwell, Unit 7F, Riverside Gardens Apartments. Then came my introduction, a brief explanation of who I was, my military service, my disability, my legal right to accessible parking, and the assignment of Spot 3B to my unit. The body of the document was the violations themselves. All 47 of them so far, each one its own minisection with date and time, duration, calculated from when I arrived and when I saw her leave, or estimated from security camera timestamps I'd requested from management. Photographic evidence, I'd taken to printing selected photos and including them directly in the document. Impact statement, describing how that specific violation affected me. Weather conditions, when relevant. Documentation of my attempts to resolve it, notes left, conversations had, complaints filed. For violation number 33, I wrote, November 14th, 2:37 p.m. Duration, 1 hour 23 minutes. Rainy weather with temperatures at 43 degrees Fahrenheit. Returned from physical therapy appointment with elevated pain levels. Forced to park in overflow lot, requiring 215-yard walk in rain. Pain level increased from 6/10 to 9/10 during walk. Arrived at apartment soaked and barely able to stand. Left note on windshield, copy attached. No response from Ms. Hartwell. I included copies of every email I'd sent to building management. Every response they'd sent back, the ones that bothered to respond at all. The pattern was damning. I'd been reporting this since September, and their responses had ranged from "we'll look into it" to complete silence. I researched the actual laws being violated. Federal law under the Americans with Disabilities Act. State vehicle code sections about accessible parking. City ordinances with specific fine amounts, $250 for a first violation, $500 for subsequent violations within a year. I did the math, 4 to 7 violations times $500 each. $23,500 in potential fines. Then I found something even more interesting. In our state, a pattern of violations in accessible parking spots could be prosecuted as a misdemeanor, carrying potential jail time of up to 6 months. I included all of this in my document, complete with citations and references to the specific legal code sections. The conclusion of my document was simple. I am requesting immediate action from building management to enforce lease terms regarding assigned parking. I am also filing a formal complaint with local police regarding repeated violations of state vehicle code. If this matter is not resolved immediately, I will be forced to pursue civil litigation for disability discrimination and harassment. The final document was 127 pages long. On December 18th, I made 3 copies of everything. 1 for building management. 1 for the police. 1 for my records. I hand-delivered the building management copy to Sandra Chen's office at 9 a.m. on a Monday morning. She was there early, probably catching up on paperwork before the week started. "Mr. Brennan," she said when I walked in, and I could hear the weariness in her voice. She'd probably been hoping to never hear from me again about this issue. "I need you to read this," I said, placing the heavy document on her desk. "Today. All of it." She looked at the document, then at me, and something in my expression must have told her this wasn't another routine complaint. This is comprehensive documentation of 47 violations of my assigned parking rights by Melissa Hartwell over the past 4 months, I continued. It includes photographic evidence, timestamps, impact statements, and records of my attempts to resolve this through proper channels, attempts that have been consistently ignored or inadequately addressed by this management office. Sandra's face had gone pale. She was flipping through the pages, her eyes widening as she saw the scope of what I'd put together. Mr. Brennan, I didn't realize it was this extensive. You didn't realize because you didn't investigate, I said, keeping my voice level. I filed my first complaint on September 8th. That was 4 months ago. If you had taken it seriously then, we wouldn't be here now. I did take it seriously. You sent one email, I interrupted. One email to Ms. Hartwell asking her to please respect assigned parking. That's not taking it seriously. That's checking a box so you can say you did something. Sandra looked down at the document, then back at me. What do you want me to do? I want you to enforce the lease agreement, I said. Ms. Hartwell has violated the terms of her lease 47 documented times. According to Section 8, Paragraph 3 of the standard lease agreement used by this property, violations of parking regulations, especially those involving designated accessible spaces, constitute grounds for lease termination. Her eyes widened. You want me to evict her? I want you to do your job, I said. I'm also filing this with the police today as a formal criminal complaint. They'll be contacting you for any additional documentation or security camera footage you might have. I turned to leave, then paused at the door. One more thing. I've been patient. I've been polite. I've followed every rule and procedure. And I've been ignored, dismissed, and mocked. That ends today. The police took my complaint more seriously than I'd expected. I walked into the station that same afternoon and asked to file a report about repeated illegal parking in a designated accessible space. The desk sergeant, a woman in her 50s with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor, directed me to a detective who specialized in quality-of-life crimes. Detective Sarah Rodriguez was probably in her early 40s, with dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail and an expression that suggested she'd seen everything and wasn't particularly impressed by any of it. But when I started explaining my situation and showed her my documentation, something changed in her face. You compiled all of this yourself? She asked, flipping through the pages. Yes, I said. 4 months of documentation. 47 violations. Everyone photographed and time-stamped. She looked at me for a long moment. You're a veteran? Yes, Marine Corps, discharged 2019. She nodded slowly. My brother served. Army. I know what those parking spots mean to guys like you. She spent the next hour going through my documentation, asking clarifying questions, making notes. When we finished, she looked up at me and said, "This is one of the most thorough civilian complaints I've ever seen. Most people just call and complain. You've basically done half our investigative work for us." I learned documentation in the military, I said. It shows. She closed the folder. Here's what's going to happen. I'm going to open a formal investigation. I'll contact building management for any additional evidence they might have. Given the number of violations and the pattern of behavior, we'll be referring this to the prosecutor's office for potential charges. What kind of charges? Each violation is a minimum $250 fine, she said. But given the number and pattern, we might be looking at misdemeanor charges under State Code 22507.8, repeatedly parking in a disabled space without authorization. That carries higher fines and potential jail time for repeat offenders. I felt something loosen in my chest. Someone was finally taking this seriously. Things moved fast after that. On December 20th, Sandra called me to say that she'd presented my documentation to the property owner, a real estate investment company based out of state. Their legal team had reviewed everything and concluded that Melissa Hartwell was in severe violation of her lease agreement. On December 21st, Melissa received a formal notice of lease violation, giving her 48 hours to respond with an explanation or corrective action plan. I heard through Derek, who heard through his girlfriend, who lived on the same floor as Melissa, that she'd gone ballistic when she got the notice. Apparently, she'd stormed into Sandra's office, demanding to know who had filed a complaint and threatening to sue for harassment. Sandra had calmly presented her with copies of the photographic evidence, not all of it, just a representative sample. 20 or so photos of her Mercedes in my spot, each one clearly time-stamped and dated. According to Derek's girlfriend, Melissa had turned white when she saw them. On December 23rd, 2 police officers came to the building to interview both me and Melissa as part of Detective Rodriguez's investigation. I heard about Melissa's interview secondhand from another tenant who'd been in the hallway. Apparently, she tried to play it off as innocent mistakes, claiming she didn't know it was that serious. When the officers explained that she was looking at potential fines exceeding $10,000 and possible misdemeanor charges, she'd started crying, insisting that she'd thought it was just building rules, not actual laws. The officers had apparently been unsympathetic. One of them, Officer Mendez, according to my neighbor's account, had said something like, "Ignorance of the law isn't a defense, especially when you've been repeatedly warned by both the disabled individual and building management." On December 27th, I received a certified letter from the property management company. "Dear Mr. Brennan," it began. "After thorough review of the extensive documentation you provided regarding repeated parking violations by Ms. Melissa Hartwell, resident of Unit 7F, we have concluded that Ms. Hartwell has engaged in a pattern of lease violations that cannot be remedied. Effective January 31st, 2025, Ms. Hartwell's lease will be terminated. She will be required to vacate the premises and will not be eligible for lease renewal at any property managed by our company. Additionally, Ms. Hartwell will be responsible for paying any and all fines levied by the City Prosecutor's Office related to her illegal parking violations." I read the letter 3 times, sitting at my kitchen table in the quiet of my apartment. 4 months. 4 months of pain, frustration, documentation, and fighting for basic dignity. And finally, there were consequences. The City Prosecutor's Office filed formal charges in early January. Melissa was charged with 47 counts of illegal parking in a designated accessible space. Each count carried a minimum fine of $250, with enhanced penalties for repeat violations. Her attorney tried to negotiate a plea deal, arguing that his client had made a mistake and had learned her lesson. The prosecutor's office, armed with my comprehensive documentation and Detective Rodriguez's investigation, wasn't interested in being lenient. The final plea agreement, reached in late January, required Melissa to plead guilty to a consolidated charge covering all 47 violations. She was fined $8,500, ordered to complete 40 hours of community service at a veterans rehabilitation center, and placed on 6 months probation, during which any parking violation would result in immediate jail time. On January 5th, I received a certified letter from a law firm representing Melissa. It was a settlement offer, $5,000 in exchange for my agreement not to pursue any civil litigation against her for disability discrimination or harassment. I sat with that letter for a few days, thinking about it. $5,000 was a lot of money for someone living on disability payments and part-time remote work. I could pay off medical bills, maybe finally get the better prosthetic fitting my orthopedic surgeon had recommended. But then I thought about violation number 47. About standing in that parking lot, in pain, exhausted, and having this woman tell me to take the hint when I asked her to stop parking in my assigned spot. I thought about every single time I'd had to walk those extra 200 yards, every time it had rained and I'd arrived at my apartment soaking wet and barely able to stand, every time I'd been late to appointments or missed phone calls because I was stuck looking for parking. I thought about what accepting that money would mean. It would mean letting her buy her way out of accountability. It would mean putting a price tag on my dignity. I called the law firm and declined the settlement offer. My client has fulfilled all legal requirements imposed by the court and building management, the attorney said, his voice tight with frustration. What more do you want? I want her to understand that actions have consequences, I said. I want her to spend those 40 hours at the Veterans Center thinking about why she's there. I want her to remember, every single time she parks anywhere for the rest of her life, that disabled parking spots aren't suggestions. This is vindictive, he said. No, I replied. This is accountability. It's March now, early morning, and I'm standing in my parking spot, the one that's actually mine, watching the sun come up over Riverside Gardens Apartments. Melissa moved out on January 29th, 2 days before her lease termination date. I saw her loading boxes into a moving truck, her expression tight and angry. She didn't look at me. I didn't say anything to her. There was nothing left to say. My parking spot has been empty and available every single day for the past 6 weeks. Building management repainted the lines and the handicapped symbol last month. Sandra said something about recommitting to accessibility compliance. The paint is bright blue now, impossible to miss. I still keep the documentation file. All 127 pages of it, plus the updates I made as the case progressed, bringing it to 183 pages total. It's backed up in 3 different places: external hard drive, cloud storage, and a physical copy in a fireproof safe. Derek asked me last week if I thought it was all worth it. The 4 months of meticulous documentation, the stress, the confrontations, the energy it took to fight this battle while also managing chronic pain and PTSD. I thought about it while we were playing video games in my apartment, and I realized the answer was complicated. On one level, yes, absolutely it was worth it. I have my parking spot back. I have my mobility and independence. I have the satisfaction of knowing that someone who thought the rules didn't apply to her learned otherwise. But on another level, it shouldn't have taken 127 pages of documentation and 4 months of my life to get people to respect a basic legal right. It shouldn't have required becoming my own investigator, advocate, and prosecutor. The systems that are supposed to protect disabled people, building management, accessible parking laws, complaint procedures, should have worked the first time I reported the problem. They didn't work because people like Melissa bank on the fact that fighting for your rights is exhausting. They bank on you giving up, on you deciding it's not worth the effort, on you accepting that some battles can't be won. But here's what I learned in Afghanistan, and what I relearned in this parking lot: you fight not because victory is guaranteed, but because the alternative is accepting defeat. Every photograph I took, every timestamp I recorded, every impact statement I wrote, those weren't just evidence. They were me refusing to be invisible. They were me insisting that my disability, my pain, my needs mattered as much as anyone else's convenience. The blue paint in my parking spot gleams in the early morning light. The wheelchair symbol is crisp and clear. And when I park there today after my physical therapy appointment, I won't have to walk an extra 200 yards. I won't have to navigate puddles and pain and the casual cruelty of someone who thought she was above the law. I'll just park, get out of my car, and walk the short distance to my building entrance like every other person who has an assigned spot. And that, more than any settlement money or criminal conviction, is what justice looks like. 1 parking spot. 127 pages. 47 violations. 4 months of documentation. And finally, the simple dignity of being able to park where I'm legally entitled to park. Sometimes the system fails you. Sometimes the only person who will fight for your rights is you. And sometimes, if you're thorough enough, patient enough, and stubborn enough, you can make that fight count. My leg still hurts. I still have nightmares. I still take more medications than any 31-year-old should have to take. But I have my parking spot back. And that's a victory worth documenting.